welcome to Prayers Radio Conversations. I'm your host, Rich Jarvis. This is my co-host, John Waterhouse.
Hey, buddy.
This show is only about prayer. Ernest Holmes, which we call spiritual mind treatment in this philosophy. You got it, John.
Thank you, Rich. Hey, we're going to have a great show today. We have an amazing guest with us. This incredible man has done extraordinary work in our organization, and it's wonderful to have Mark Gilbert, Dr. Mark Gilbert, with us today. Mark is a minister in our movement. He has done some amazing things, including being on staff in leadership at our home office for about 10 years, way back when we started the CSL thing. He is a writer. He's a podcaster. He'll talk about those to us in a little bit. He's also the vice president of our Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, doing amazing work there. And he does have a doctorate. It's a doctorate of humane letters for the amazing work that he does in the world. We are definitely honored and blessed to have you with us today, Mark. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John. And Rich, it's great to be with you guys and share your podcast and hopefully get into some interesting conversation here.
I think we're going to be able to do that, but we always start with prayer. So would you treat us into our time together?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I invite you to do, if you're comfortable, is to close your eyes if it's appropriate for you where you are, and just move your attention and focus inward to that flow within you where you know the divine moves in and through you. And in this space, we simply know in this moment that there is only one life, one power, one essence, one divine force, one presence that moves in and through everything and gives everything its very existence, its very being. We know this for the world of form and for the world of the divine and the world of mind. It's in this space of recognizing this unity of life that there is this wonderful diversity of life in its expression. And we know that we come together on this podcast today to share ideas and thoughts regarding the power of prayer, and to share love, to share the connection between us and through us to everyone who listens to these words, and reminding everyone of their truth, that they are part of this oneness, this divine flow, to uplift our eyes and ears and consciousness to an awareness of unity and to see our lives through those eyes. And so just knowing the conversation is perfect this day, that we say and be who we need to be, and that we share from the hearts. We give our wisdom outward and also receive it from each other, knowing that this time is perfect. Gratitude fills our heart for this. Gratitude fills us for the learning, the growing, the teaching, and the receiving that we all share in this moment. And I release these words into the law, knowing that they are so, and so it is.
No, it is.
That was great, Mark.
Hey, thanks, Rich.
There was a couple of things that I wanted to check with you on. You're one of the websites that you're suggesting, because you do work with them, is the Science of Mind Archives. Is it .com or .org?
ScienceOfMindArchives.com.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to double check because you're the man that knows.
You work a lot with their website, Rich. We can get into that, but it's, I've been for the last number of years sharing a lot of things on the website, including a lot of recordings and unpublished documents of Ernest Holmes. And, if your readers haven't listened to Ernest audio, we've got over 200 audios of him out there, and we're continuously putting more. So it's a great resource.
And you also have a podcast that you talked about that you're on. And you want give us where we could find that also, please.
Yeah. It's if you go to you can go to my website, which is consciousbridge.com, and all my teachings and things are resourced there. But it's done through the New Thought Media Network. You can also Google New Thought Media Network and go to their YouTube page and find it, or my website. And the podcast I'm doing, it's doing with Reverend Barb Bew. We are half a year into this podcast, doing a weekly one, and it's quite a hoot. It came out of a conversation we had where we really loved getting together and talking about science of mind and the depth of it, and exploring how to apply it in modern life. And the podcast is called Conversations in Mind. And what we do every week is we take a topic. It can be anything from what is mind to do we need spiritual teachers to, how do we stay spiritually grounded in these challenging times, to a host of other topics. And we have a question every week, and the two of us dive into what we think about that. And we don't prep it. We just get into it and sort of discuss it. And occasionally we bring some guests on as well to discuss the topic. We did that recently on the discussion regarding masculinity and spirituality. And we've done it with some others. It's just a fun time to get together and think about it. We have people who send us notes and ideas for topics, and so it's great. It's Conversations in Mind. It's on the New Thought Media Network, and I also am one of the rotating hosts on their Science of Mind Saturday morning conversation program, which is done live. And we take in live callers and questions and discuss Science of Mind textbook and other resources from the archives. And that's on Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Mountain Time, live. And it's
So
on
what we'll do is we'll have this in the show notes where all this information is, so that our listeners, because a lot of them are audio, they just like to hear it on Apple
Sure.
Podcasts, work, can check you out a little bit later. I think that's
check me out.
Yeah. So how does prayer show up in your life, though? I mean, you've got so much going on.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're completely blessed and stuff, but I know that there's daily affirmations that pop up that you're like, whoa.
Oh, yeah. And I would mention that my wife is a practitioner emeritus. And so if I don't think to do a treatment, she will think to do it. And sometimes something's going on in the world, and one of us will call the other into prayer. And so I won't say it's an everyday affair that we call to prayer for the two of us, but there are many days that something is going on where one of us may feel called to pray for a specific person or a specific situation, or sometimes just the world in general. Or if there's something going on in our lives, we'll call ourselves to prayer. So we do a lot of joint prayers, the two of us, and I think that is if you have somebody that you can pray with, you know how deep that helps you in terms of going deeper, and we have a process of feeding back and forth and doing joint prayers. But above and beyond that, it gets to a part of my natural spiritual process is to get up each day and sit in quiet contemplation and meditation. And that usually leads into a prayer, a silent prayer. I know we'll probably talk a little bit about different ways of praying and types of prayer and so forth. But, I will say that, we talk about a lot about treatment and the 5 steps or 7 steps or whatever you want. But I would say a lot of times, for me, it's more moving into that other kind of prayer that Holmes talk about, which is direct realization. And I think with a lot of experience and feeling into the divine and feeling into the flow of the oneness and non-duality of life, you can more and more move from a argumentative style or the 5-step process into a direct realization. And I think a lot of times in my morning meditations, I may not go through the 5 steps, but I will have a realization of truth over some situation or item. Hope that answers your question, and probably more than you wanted.
I think it was wonderful. You covered a few questions, but I'll let John get the next question on this.
Well, you're telling us that you start your day by either meditating, by just setting your consciousness for the day, and that you do realization work in the midst of that, which I think is brilliant and wonderful. Is that your tendency to do that every morning?
Yes, it is, John. Yeah, it is. It's usually it used to be coffee, now it's tea. But, I do get up and let the dog out and pet her and create my hot beverage. And then I like to just sit in quietness for a while. And it's an interesting thing, John. It's contemplation and it's sometimes realization. And communing with the divine is a two-way flow, as you well know. And so sometimes in those mornings, I get downloads of information that are ideas for me to pursue, wisdom to glean. Maybe I've been reading something and trying to understand it, and there becomes sort of an awareness of the truth of what I'm trying to understand comes into my consciousness. So sometimes it's a download from the divine. And other times it's just a realization of some truth that I want to manifest. So it could be a flow in either direction, if we can use direction as a method of describing it. And that's what.
Go ahead.
I was going to simply say, but then throughout the day, there's times that, it's not just a morning thing for me. It's throughout the day, there are times where I will stop and and try to feel into uh, the oneness of the universe. I've very much been in studying a lot of Vedantic teachings lately. Ramana Maharshi is one of my key things I read a lot lately, and Aurobindo, who Holmes was reading a lot in his later years. And from all of that, I've really gotten into a sense of trying to really live in a state of non-dual awareness. And that is something that it's difficult to do it continuously. But what I try to do throughout the day is to try to move to a space of consciously trying to commune and see and experience the oneness of life. And so, because it's so easy to get mesmerized by what's going on in the world of form and think that that's the true reality. And I got to deal with all this stuff that's going on around me, and we just get so just enamored and mesmerized by that we lose our focus in being tapped into oneness. And so I think taking some time during the day, throughout the day, to even, sometimes just in sit and reflection, I can be just like looking out at the world and going, all of this is one, all of this is in me, and I'm in that. And it's all a divine flow. And having that realization brings me back to center and brings me back to truth. And I see that as a key part of my spiritual practices as well. And I got to add reading because I'm always got so many spiritual books that I'm going on with. And, my role with the archives, I serve as one of their key researchers. And I know that if many people aren't, I know we were going to talk about this, a few years ago, Archives published the book Ernest Holmes at Asilomar, and it was the work that I actually came up with the idea and pitched it to the archives and to publishing. Everybody loved it, but then I had to go put the book together, and it was based on my work with their website and realizing that in inventorying what they had and had never put out, we had a treasure trove of Ernest Holmes classes and talks that he had given at Asilomar in the 1950s, and they had never been published, except for Sermon by the Sea, which most people were familiar with that. The funny thing is that he did a Sermon by the Sea every year from 1954 to 1959. The well-known one was from 1959, but every year he would close out the week session at Asilomar with a Sermon by the Sea. Unfortunately, it was referenced in the programs and things, but the only one we have the transcript for is the famous one that he did in 1959. But he actually did a closing speech every year at Asilomar.
And there's no record of that?
Only that he did it. Even in the years, John, that we have the transcripts of his talks, like for 1959 and 58 and 57, we have all the talks he did. And that's why the book has about 23 different classes and talks in it, I think it is. But also his 5-part mysticism class that he did in 56 is all contained in the book. But the point I was going to mention is that in putting that book together, it's a lot of reading Ernest Holmes and bringing it forward to the public. It's a wonderful book with a lot of pictures of Holmes, and there's an intro that I put together that gives you sort of a background of what it was like for him at the conferences every year. But we had a lot of.
You're reading Aurobindo. I'm reading Holmes. I'm actually reading the Essential Ernest Holmes right now. When I finish with it, I think I'll read that book about his lessons taught at Asilomar.
Oh yeah, it's very deep, and it's one of the key points the reason I brought it up in the context of spiritual practices is that right now, because this book got so well received, and there were ministers offering classes on it and teaching it and things like that. I know that Jesse Jennings did a whole session down at his center in the Houston area on it, and it's one of those things where if you've read Holmes, we always talk about what's the introductory book to Holmes, but this is one of those deeper books where, like, if you want to go deeper. And there's several books of his which will really take you deeper into his more metaphysical kind of teachings. And because this was people who were steeped in the philosophy in the 50s, it wasn't one of his general talks that he did for like the radio shows or his Sunday talks and things like that. He was getting into very deep metaphysical concepts such as time tracks and changing your time track and how the absolute is the relative and the finite is the infinite and time is timeless. And there's these interesting things where he's bringing together the world of non-form and the world of form together and outlay on it. And it's a real depth of his teaching that I think it's valuable for that student of Ernest Holmes who wants to go deeper with it. But the key thing I'm sort of like going long-winded on this, but we had such good feedback from the book. People have said, "Are you going to bring anything else out?" And so right now, what I'm doing is we've already have met and have the funding, and we're planning to bring out, and it'll probably be out next year for the 100-year anniversary, is a book on his other classes from the 1950s. If you've ever looked at like the Holmes Papers books,
Love those.
yes, well, a lot of those have his so-called Tuesday invitational classes in them. And that the Holmes Papers books only used about 12, 13, 14 of those classes. And we had about tons more. And so what I'm working on now is a book that it could be 2 volumes, but we're going to maybe get it into 1. But it's all the unpublished classes from the 1950s that he did. And they're primarily...
What are you calling it?
Well, right now, the work, Ernest Holmes and rare and unpublished classes from the 1950s.
Nice.
And but we're in the early stages of it. I'm in the midst of daily going through these unpublished class talks and cleaning them up and getting them ready, writing brief summaries for them, creating a title for them, because most of the transcripts will simply say Tuesday class at the top, and so it's an everyday. It's a spiritual practice. This is where I was going. It's sitting and reading unpublished Holmes material and trying to synthesize it. And that's a spiritual practice in and of itself, John.
Do you find some of it is over your head?
Oh my gosh, do I not understand any of it?
That's great. Good for you.
Of course. I'm still studying the Asilomar book that we put out. It's I have my copy all marked up because even though I was so involved with putting the book together, I now go back and I read it and I reread it and I reread parts of it, and it's like reading a textbook. You go back and read the textbook and you find stuff that you didn't know was in there because you have changed and you understand it better.
Right,
well, we've had a couple of people on, and I just remind them. I said, well, Holmes talks about Jesus like around page 500 and goes and quotes the Bible, and
right.
And go, oh yeah, that's right. But yeah, I think it's great. The Holmes Papers itself I did a talk on the time part of the Holmes book 2, but I'm not going to get into that. That's a different show. What tangible results have you seen from prayer? I mean, I know we apply prayer, we put it out there, and we know this, and then our thoughts go out in the universe after we've released it. What tangible results have you seen in your life by doing prayer?
Oh, my God, that's a whole nother show, Rich. But
well, we can have you back again too. You know that.
I will simply say this: that for the last probably 20 plus years, I have been divinely guided and trained myself to listen to my intuition. And so even the role of moving into home office with CSL was divinely guided. Even the time, the time I was there, I served in 2 different roles. When I left one role and then helped create the new role in global services, that was divinely guided. When I left that to take some time off, I was taking care of my elderly father at the time, who's since passed away. And I took some time off. I sat in the space of just nothingness and asked, what's mine to do? And I kept getting the message, go back to basics. And the next thing I knew, they were asking me to teach the roots class for CSL, which led me to teaching prac class for a couple of years. And it also led me into being on the archives board. It led me into this rich treasure trove of unpublished material. It's led me to having all this Ernest Holmes audio. I've listened to hundreds of hours of Holmes. And I get this. And so what's the prayer? It's listening and then saying, what is mine to do and how should I show up in this life? And it's just interesting that it's like you get in the flow, and Holmes called it the harmony, when you're in alignment with the divine pattern, that when you can feel into and sense what that divine pattern is, and then you open yourself to it. It's like magic. It's like what they teach in the Course in Miracles, that the miracles just like showing up in your life. That these things just the whole flow of the Asilomar book was it's a funny thing, but it's like the material got presented to me. The idea came, everything fell into place. We published the book before the last time CSO was at Asilomar. I'll give you one more quick example, just being in the flow of that. was that after the book had already been laid out and had gone for publication, I was doing research in the archives when they were still here in Colorado. And I found this videotape, and all it said was Asilomar on it and a woman's name. And so it was, we didn't have a VHS tape at the archives, VHS player. And so I brought it home and I had to get mine out of the garage and hook it up so I could figure out what the heck was on this videotape, thinking it had to be something related, to the book that we just finished. Lo and behold, it's 30 minutes of somebody's home video that they had converted from movie cameras in the 1950s in color and included in its water skiing and parties and all this stuff, this particular family. But right in the middle of this 30-minute video was about 2 to 3 minutes of their time at an Asilomar religious science conference. And right in the middle of that was several clips of Ernest Holmes, silent movies in color. And of course, if you've seen Ernest Holmes in the one TV show that has been, is out on the internet, and it was redigitized actually by the archives a couple of years ago. It has a cleaned up copy for it. That's the only time we've ever seen a film of him. And now here's the second film. And to be divinely guided to finding this, I was actually looking for something else and find this videotape. That's the kind of magical flow that just so before it was in that interim between the book being finished and before I went to Asilomar to do a presentation on it, I get handed this unknown video recording of Ernest Holmes, which we previewed at Asilomar back in 2023. So that's just an example. But I could go on with the rest of my life and how friendships show up, the right people show up. All of it is being opened and being in tune with the infinite, to borrow Trine's phrase, knowing the divine patterns that are out there and saying what's mine to do, and then being open to it, not letting go and not having attachment to what you've done and been in prior incarnations of yourself in this lifetime.
Wow. And that you had a VHS player in your garage. Who the hell has one of those anymore? That's amazing.
Well, I tell you, it came in handy because we recently discovered, and we haven't put it out yet, is a video of Raymond Charles Barker. So, yeah. So I'll give you a little sneak preview. That's coming out. We're in the midst of doing some research behind it. But we've already digitized it, and it's going to be coming out on the Archives YouTube page later this year.
Wonderful.
So I have a question that I like to ask people who teach practitioners. In your teaching of practitioners, did you have any, how do I want to say this, any techniques or things that you would do with them that wouldn't be in the curriculum, just your idea on ways to open people up to the power of spiritual mind treatment?
Yeah. There's a reminder that I use to myself, John, that I teach with my students, and I've got to say that when I was teaching, and I did say to them, okay, here's the 5 steps. Here's how to do them. Let's be sure we know how to say and move through the 5 steps. You're going to be graded in your licensing as a practitioner on knowing the 5 steps. Okay, so get that down. Get that down. I said, on the other hand, don't be in the real world so tied to the direct sequence. And by that, I mean, if you are, the most important part of a spiritual mind treatment, in my opinion, are steps 1 and 2. Because if you don't establish the consciousness within yourself that you are speaking the truth into the unity of oneness, then it's just words and with no power or very little power. But if you can anchor your consciousness into knowing and feeling that there is a divine energy and flow and consciousness that is moving through you, if you can anchor your awareness into that, and that's what steps 1 and 2 to me do, then the rest of the prayer will flow. People get hung up on the words and did I say it correctly and blah, blah, blah.
Performance anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. You well know it. And but I tell people, if you find yourselves in step 3 or 4 and you're not in the flow, go back to step 1 and 2. And so don't look at it that, I'm now in step 4, I got to go to step 5 and I'm done. If you're not feeling it, go back to the beginning and re-anchor your consciousness. And it doesn't matter that you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's probably one of the biggest things that I try to teach.
Yeah, in my spiritual practice and doing treatment work, I'm finding more and more that the first two steps are blending together.
Yeah.
That I'm going back and rather than trying to do step one and complete with that and then go to step two, I'm back and forth in it.
Oh, I am too, John, 100%, 100%. Because to me, it's all that
We
those
don't
two
teach
steps.
that, but that's what it comes to.
Yeah, and I think people realize that on their own at some point, if they really are truly getting the consciousness that the prayer calls for, if they're truly stepping into that high level of consciousness, they'll recognize they're not in it, and they have to go through one and two, one and two, one and two, and just let them flow together, and then move on. You know, I will tell you that there's something I've been playing with recently, just to get at your question a little more deeper. And I haven't really taught this in classes, although I have talked with this on other podcasts with people. We've talked about the fact that you can take the 5 steps, and each step is an individual spiritual practice in and of itself.
Absolutely.
And so, and I won't take the time right now to go through, but each one of them you can take it and describe it. Like, for example, just the affirmations is step 3. We teach affirmations, but the aspect of what we use affirmations for is a spiritual practice is step 3. Gratitude, we teach a spiritual practice is step 4. The whole idea of releasing and letting go, is step 5. And then we can talk about non-duality and stepping into the essence of non-duality and oneness is step 1. The fact that we are part of that oneness and how tying ourselves into that. In fact, you can look at from the stance of the Vedanta and the Turiya and Turiyatita. Those prayer stages are really steps 1 and 2 of the science of mind treatment. But the thing that occurred to me recently that I've sort of been playing with, and I throw it out to you guys, is looking at the prayer in reverse. And it's almost like a steps to enlightenment process. That letting go or release is actually what, it's teaching non-attachment. One of the first things we have to do is we're so attached to the material world that when we take the prayer backwards, the very last step of releasing is releasing our attachment to the physical world in a way.
So you start your prayer with that.
Yeah, so start your prayer with that. Start with prayer with non-attachment. And then you move into gratitude. Well, gratitude for life, gratitude, is once you let go of attachment to form and you have gratitude, you start opening your heart to gratitude for everything. So a next step in your enlightenment process is really moving into the heart and moving into a sense of gratitude. And then as you build that gratitude, you move into that now looking at the life differently. And it's less about things. It's less about trying to have material goods, which I think a lot of times people, they anchor that on in their initial usage of prayer. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I want to be very clear, but when you take the prayers deeper, you become less about manifesting parking places and red cars and wealth and things of that nature. And so there's an awareness of gratitude that starts looking at manifesting for the world in large that sorts occur when you've come from that step of non-attachment. And then as you move into steps 2 and then 1, you're moving into 2 is an early, I would see it as sort of like the kind of meditative practice where you recognize that everything you are one with everything out there. And so it's a part of the non-dual process. But as part of that process, they often teach to look out there and recognize that I am that, I am that, I am that, and then I am. But at a certain point, you have to let go of that and then move into it. And the final step, the first step for mine, is the one where you're really recognizing that the world out there and the world in here, the world out there is in here, which is the previous step. But then recognizing that you are both, that out there and in here are all one. And that's the first step. So, I haven't fully developed this idea. You're the first ones that have really voiced it too. But it's been sort of coming up in my meditations, talking about getting, information, is how the prayer really in its reverse is sort of it's a roadmap to enlightenment in a way, if we reverse the steps a little bit. So I don't know.
That's
I'm going
a
to
lovely exercise. I've never heard of that before. I think that's a great exercise. Every practitioner should try it.
Yeah, exactly. Because ultimately, that's what I think my sort of take on prayer work and science of mind and New Thought in general is that we come in sort of like we have the spiritual urge in us to push forward and understand life and consciousness and who we are, but it's still anchored in material form and material needs and material wishes and desires. And as we know, many people who come into our community, they're usually hurting, wanting something. They may get techniques out of science of mind, heal whatever they're wanting, and then walk out the door. But it's only when they stay with the teachings that they want to, and they go deeper, that they realize that there is an under-level current that is beyond materializing material things to a deeper richness of transcending the material world and tying yourself into a non-dual state of reality and awareness. And that's where, to me, the depth, and that's why these teachings that I've been going through in the Solimar book and Holmes' richness in his last decade of his life is so important, because with the people who wanted to go deeper, he went deeper, and he was really speaks to these aspects of non-duality and letting go of it. I don't have a quote here, but I used it recently on another podcast I was on, where he talks about stepping away from material world. At some point, we'll let go of that, because the truth, he says, not that there's anything wrong with it, but the real depth comes in the seeing through it and moving into the awareness of how you are an expression of the divine in this multiplicity, but you're anchored in the oneness. You have to actually go on that evolutionary journey and recognizing your oneness, and then coming back into the world of form and living from that consciousness. Many people don't have that oneness aspect, and they're focused on the material stuff. But as you grow and evolve into oneness, you come back and live in the world of form with a richness that wants to be of service to everything and everyone.
I think the short version is that the realization of self, knowing that you are the mirror, the reality that you project, is the important aspect of this whole thing.
Beautiful. I love the way you phrase that, Rich. That's great.
Coming soon to my book. No, I'm kidding. You talked about the prayer work. That you do a 5-step or 7-step prayer. What is your preference? And to piggyback off what you said earlier, you said sometimes you just do a 3-step, or know that it is by being that divine presence within.
Well, it's one step really, in my mind. And Holmes wrote about that in the textbook. He called it argumentative and realization as the two different methods. To your first question, though, regarding 7-step, no, I understand the 7-step and the use of denials in that. And to me, I'm not opposed to using denials in prayer. In fact, I use them, and I think it depends on where I am in terms of whatever it is I'm talking about in the moment. And I sort of roll denials and then the reaffirmation all into step 3. So if I'm going to use denials, it's that turning away from aspect, and I'll voice that into a verbal affirmative prayer in step 3. But I don't formally go through 7 steps, Rich. If I'm going to go through a formal prayer, it's going to be through the 5 steps. What I was talking about, though, and the other is that Holmes spoke to the fact that why do we call it argumentative? Who are we arguing with? We're arguing with ourselves. Duh.
Well, sister.
Exactly, John. And so I'm having to argue with myself that it's not this material mark, this material that I'm this separate pocket of consciousness that's separate from everybody. I got to argue myself out of that mesmerizing worldview that we often come to science of mind with. And so that's why it's argumentative. It's arguing with ourselves to turn away from that and to recognize the oneness and then speaking from that truth. And so we have to argue ourselves out of the mesmerizing state of the material world. But once you
tell my students that if they wanted to do a denial in their work, they were not to take a breath between what they're denying and what they're replacing it with.
That's great. I love that.
Don't give room for anything else to come in there.
Yes. I love that, because, there's a whole thing about, anytime you if you think about anything negative, you're giving energy to that. And if you can't stop on that, and if you stop on that denial, you can't be giving energy to a degree to the condition that you're trying to negate. So I love that, John. That's a great way of approaching it. Yeah, but realization for me is simply moving into a consciousness of non-duality or oneness, seeing and living in that space, and then seeing the truth of whatever it is. So if I'm going to be treating on um, doing, showing up as in pure consciousness and awareness with the highest expression of who I am on a podcast, then I would visualize that and know it in that meditative state and see it in that moment and just know that it's done. And so that sort of I don't have to argue with myself to get into the state of knowing it. I just simply visualize it in the meditative state. And that, and if you study Holmes' history, that's typically what he did too, except in settings. Group settings. If somebody asked him to do prayer work, his prayer work in private, silent, and simply in realization states.
Really? He didn't speak outwardly when he did his work in his library?
Well, I can't say that he didn't, John, but I
Well,
do know
because I don't know how to do that. I have to say it out lound, even if there's no one else for miles. So that's just me. And I always sort of assumed that he would sit there and just speak it, but maybe not.
no,
Well,
from what I have read and studied of him, it is my sense, and people have written that he would just simply go into silence and say that it was complete. Now,
That's
was he
cool.
going through the 5 steps or 7 steps in his head? I can't say that he didn't, but from what he wrote in terms of realization being a method, it makes just great sense, and it makes great experientially. It makes sense to me as
Well,
well.
most of his career was just 3 steps. There
Yeah,
was no Thanksgiving and release. That came later.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Although
well,
it's interesting, if you really want to hear, and you guys are interested in prayer, um, all throughout his career from like in the 40s, he was always doing Sunday messages at different theaters in LA.
Right.
And for the 1950s, until he handed it off to Gene Emmett Clark in 56, I think it was, he was speaking every Sunday at the Beverly Theater in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of the transcripts of his talks. We have a lot of the audio of his talks. And a lot of them we've put out in the last year or so on the website. We got more that are coming. But what he did during his Sunday talks is that, well, I won't go through the full service, but there were 2 parts where Ernest talked. And one part was where he taught treatment and did a treatment. And then they would have a little music, and then he would come back and do his message for that talk, which would end not necessarily with a treatment, but with really him in the flow and highfalutin language at the end. You knew he was steeped in oneness at the end of the talk. But what I want to come back to is that for many of these Sunday messages, the first part of the talk was this healing thing where he weaves in and out about talking about treatment and doing a treatment. And it's sort of a weave of between the two to where he
Right.
ends up doing a full he ends up ending with a treatment, and so it is. And then there's a break, and then he comes back with. But if you go listen to some of those, because that's where he talks the most, and he's doing it to a public audience about the importance of treatment and how to treat and what we're doing, and then he treats for people. He's treating for Eisenhower as president, and he's treating for the world in general and for peace and stuff. It's really cool to listen to this kind of stuff.
well, Mark, we're at the
Absolutely.
4 minute mark, so we need to shotgun the rest of the questions if you're open to that.
Whatever.
You want me to go?
Go for it, John.
Uh, oh golly, my question just flew out of my head
All
as soon
right.
as I said that.
How do you?
Do you have an elevator speech? Do you have that 30-second thing where somebody says, "What's science of mind?" What would you say?
Uh, yes.
What comes to mind?
It's a philosophy that takes from science, religion, and philosophy and finds the common threads of them and teaches oneness and the power of our consciousness to create the lives we want.
That'll work. Very nice.
When do you
Rich?
release? When do you release a prayer to law?
Immediately,
There you go. That's a good question. That's the good answer. And then we have one other question I want to get. What's your favorite Science of Mind book by Ernest Holmes? And don't say Science of Mind. I just think
And don't say the Asilomar book that I've been promoting. It probably is always the one I'm currently reading, but I will tell you, okay, oftentimes the question is, what's the book you recommend to people who I had some secular friends of mine who bought the Holmes book when it came out, and I said, what I said, you're not going to understand Science of Mind from this book because he goes so deep. I said, if you want to understand something, maybe go read this thing called You as a nice
That's where
introduction.
everybody should start, right there.
Yeah. What book do I would say one that I've enjoyed in the last couple of years that was a surprise to me was Your Invisible Self, I think it's called. It's a little book where he found these wood blocks of pictures, and it was published with some pictures and little chapters by Ernest Thompson. But he's very deep and very mystical in that book.
He was very mystical.
Yeah.
That's the blessing of it all. And I can't wait to get a hold of your book and just dive into that. I want to see what you found. That's great.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for being with us today. This has been phenomenal.
So the final question, what would you want our audience to take away from this talk today on this show?
That prayer works, but prayer works with your willingness to shift your consciousness into realizing that the material world and the non-material world are one, and that there's a power in the non-material world that is available for you to feel into and to know at the deepest level of your essence.
Very nice. Very nice.
And then again, you're with the science, you work with the Science of Mind archives, you've done all these other good things going on, and then your latest book, we plug again, if you would.
Ernest Holmes at Asilomar is the latest one published through the archives.
You're right in front of your face for Ernest. There it is. Everybody can see it. There you go.
I see it.
There you go.
Yeah.
And the name of your podcast and how we would find that?
That the podcast is Conversations in Mind, kind of like Science of Mind, and it is available on the New Thought Media Network. You can go to YouTube and Google New Thought Media Network, or you can go to my website, which is consciousbridge.com. Lots of New Thought resources, blogs, articles, links to my YouTube page, etc., all at Conscious Bridge.
All right. And then if you'd pray us out.
Absolutely. We just feel into that oneness again, knowing and sensing that there is only that one life, and it moves in and through each and every one of us. Not only the three of us, but everyone who is listening to these words. Just feeling that oneness, we now know that the time together was one of a gift for each and every one of us. It blessed us. It allowed us to share from the heart, to learn what we needed to learn, to hear what we needed to hear, and that we go forward from this time together, anchored in the divine, anchored in that relationship with God, Spirit, the one, the thing itself, bringing that blessing and its magical gifts of life to everything that we experience as we move forward. We give thanks for this time together. We release these words knowing they're so, and so it is.
So it is. Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. It's been wonderful to spend time with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, John. I appreciate being with you today.
All the best with your projects.
And one last thing, where can they find you, John?
Oh, you want me to do that too? Okay. So my latest book is out. It's called Spirits Awakening. It's available on Amazon. I am now doing some retreat work around the country, and we won't get into where I'll be because it will have already happened probably by the time you watch this. But I am doing that work, and my life is full and rich and wonderful. And I have my other podcast too, which is called Higher Reality on the Edge of Understanding, and that's going very well. We'll leave it there.
Fabulous. Well, we are Prayers Radio. I'm Rich Jarvis. We thank our guest, Reverend Dr. Mark Gilbert.
Mm-hmm.
And we just want to say like, subscribe, or support. And stay tuned next week for a fun-filled adventure in Prayers Radio. And just remember, if you don't say a prayer, you ain't got a prayer. Everybody say bye.
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 Your prayer is my prayer. your